Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. A hand emerged from beneath the covers, fumbling to silence the incessant noise. As consciousness slowly returned, something felt off. The room came into focus, but it wasn't familiar. Soft pink walls, delicate curtains billowing in the breeze from an open window, and a vanity mirror adorned with photographs and trinkets. This wasn't right. Sitting up abruptly, long strands of honey blonde hair cascaded over shoulders that felt smaller, more slender. Heart racing, hands explored unfamiliar curves and contours. This wasn't just a different room, it was a different body. What the hell? The voice that escaped was higher, softer, undeniably feminine. Stumbling out of bed, bare feet padding across plush carpet, the figure approached the full-length mirror on the closet door. The reflection was shocking. A young woman, early 20s, with wide green eyes and a heart-shaped face. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and sleep shorts, revealing long, toned legs. No, 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 the woman in the mirror mouthed, mirroring the panic rising in her chest. This can't be happening. But it was. Somehow, inexplicably, Andrew had woken up in the body of a woman he'd never seen before. A gentle knock at the door made him jump. Maisie, are you up, sweetie? Breakfast is ready. Maisie, was that his name now? I'll be down in a minute, he called back, wincing at the unfamiliar voice. Frantically, he began opening drawers and rifling through closets, searching for clues about his new identity. A student ID card revealed that Maisie Collins was indeed a college student, just as he had been. But instead of his familiar campus in Oregon, she attended a university in Florida. How was this possible? Had he somehow swapped bodies with this Maisie person? Was she currently inhabiting his body, equally confused and terrified? With trembling hands, he picked out clothes that looked comfortable, a pair of jeans and a simple blue t-shirt. Getting dressed was a surreal experience, one he tried to rush through with minimal exploration of his new form. Taking a deep breath, he opened the bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. Family photos lined the walls, showing Maisie at various ages with her parents and an older brother. It was disconcerting to see a life he had no memory of living. He made his way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and bacon. In the kitchen, a middle-aged woman with Maisie's blonde hair was plating up breakfast. There you are, sleepyhead, she said warmly. I was beginning to think you'd sleep right through your first day of classes. Classes? Right. Somehow, in the midst of this body-swapping insanity, he'd have to pretend to be a normal college student. Sorry, I guess I'm just nervous, he mumbled, sliding into a chair at the kitchen table. You'll do great, honey, Maisie's mother assured him, setting a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. You've been looking forward to this psychology course all summer. Psychology. At least that was familiar territory. It had been his major back in his own body. As he ate, he tried to act natural, making non-committal sounds in response to his mother's chatter about the day ahead. His mind raced, trying to piece together how this could have happened. Was it some kind of elaborate prank? A vivid hallucination? Or had he actually, impossibly, switched bodies with a stranger? After breakfast, he retreated to Maisie's room to gather supplies for class. He found a backpack already packed with textbooks and notebooks. A class schedule was pinned to a corkboard detailing her courses for the day. He changed into a pair of comfortable sneakers, grateful for practical footwear. The last thing he needed was to navigate this strange new body in heels. As he headed out the door, Maisie's mother called out, "Don't forget, you're meeting Zoe for coffee after your last class." Great, another person he'd have to pretend to know. The walk to campus was surreal. The Florida heat and humidity hit him like a wall as soon as he stepped outside. Palm trees lined the streets, a far cry from the towering pines he was used to in Oregon. He found himself hyper-aware of his new body as he walked. The sway of hips, the bounce of chest. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. The campus was bustling with activity as students rushed to their first classes of the semester. Andrew felt like an imposter as he navigated the unfamiliar grounds, relying heavily on the map app on Maisie's phone. He managed to find his first class, Intro to Cognitive Psychology, without too much trouble. As he settled into a seat near the back of the lecture hall, a bubbly redhead plopped down beside him.
Maisie, can you believe we're finally taking this class? I've been dying to get into Dr. Ramirez's section for, ever.
Andrew forced a smile, frantically searching for an appropriate response.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
The redhead, who he assumed must be the mysterious Zoe he was meant to meet later, launched into a rapid-fire discussion of the syllabus, upcoming assignments, and campus gossip. Andrew nodded along, trying to absorb as much information as possible about Maisie's life and social circle. As the professor began the lecture, Andrew found himself relaxing slightly. The material was familiar, even if everything else in his life had been turned upside down. He took diligent notes, partly out of habit and partly to maintain the illusion of being a dedicated student. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of classes and navigating campus. By lunchtime, Andrew's head was spinning with information overload, not just from the lectures, but from the constant effort of pretending to be someone he wasn't. He found a quiet bench in a secluded corner of the quad and pulled out his phone. Well, Maisie's phone. He hesitated for a moment before opening her social media apps, feeling like he was invading her privacy. But he needed information if he was going to survive in this bizarre situation. Scrolling through her Instagram, he pieced together more details about Maisie's life. She was on the swim team, had a part-time job at a local bookstore, and seemed to have a tight-knit group of friends. There were no signs of a boyfriend, which was a small relief. That would have been an additional complication he wasn't prepared to deal with. As he was deep diving into Maisie's digital life, a shadow fell across the phone screen. He looked up to see a tall, athletically built guy smiling down at him. "Hey, Maisie, ready for swim practice later?" Andrew's stomach dropped. Swim practice. Of course, because this day wasn't challenging enough already.
Yeah,
he managed, trying to sound enthusiastic. "Can't wait." The guy, whose name Andrew gleaned from context was Ethan, sat down next to him, launching into a discussion about their training regimen and upcoming meets. Andrew nodded along, making vague affirmative noises and praying he wouldn't be expected to contribute anything substantial to the conversation. When Ethan finally left for his next class, Andrew let out a sigh of relief. He had about an hour before his next lecture, which he decided to use strategizing how to handle the impending swim practice disaster. He couldn't just skip it, that would raise too many suspicions. But the thought of changing in a locker room full of women, let alone parading around in a swimsuit, made him break out in a cold sweat. As he agonized over his options, his phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Don't forget, coffee at the grind after your last class. Can't wait to hear all about your summer."
Andrew groaned. Right. Another social obligation he'd have to muddle through. He briefly considered feigning illness to escape both the coffee date and swim practice, but decided against it. If he was going to figure out what had happened to him, and hopefully how to reverse it, he needed to gather as much information as possible about Maisie's life and routines. The afternoon classes passed in a haze of anxiety as Andrew's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan for the challenges ahead. When his last lecture finally ended, he made his way to The Grind, the campus coffee shop where he was supposed to meet Zoe. The redhead was already there, waving enthusiastically from a corner table. Andrew plastered on what he hoped was a convincing smile and joined her. "There you are!" Zoe exclaimed, pushing a steaming mug towards him. "I already ordered your usual caramel macchiato with an extra shot, right?" "Perfect, thanks," Andrew replied, grateful for the caffeine boost. "So spill!" Zoe leaned forward eagerly. "How was your summer? Did you end up going on that camping trip with your family? And more importantly, did you run into that cute lifeguard from last year?" Andrew's mind raced, trying to cobble together a response from the fragments of information he'd gleaned about Maisie's life. "The camping trip was great,"
he began cautiously. "Lots of hiking and beautiful scenery.
As for the lifeguard, no luck there. Zoe's face fell slightly. Oh, bummer. Well, there's plenty of fish in the sea, right? Speaking of which, how are things with Ethan? I saw you two looking cozy on the quad earlier. Andrew nearly choked on his coffee. Ethan? Oh, we were just talking about swim practice. Zoe raised an eyebrow. Uh-huh. Swim practice? Is that what the kids are calling it these days? It's not like that, Andrew protested, feeling his face heat up. We're just teammates. If you say so, Zoe sing-songed, clearly unconvinced. Anyway, are you ready for practice? Coach Martinez mentioned she might be timing us for relays today. Andrew's stomach clenched. Actually, I'm not feeling great, he said, seizing the opportunity. I might have to skip practice today. Concern crossed Zoe's face. Oh no, are you coming down with something? Do you want me to walk you home? No, Andrew said quickly. I think I just need some rest. I'll be fine for tomorrow's practice. After making his excuses and promising to text Zoe later, Andrew left the coffee shop feeling guilty but relieved. He'd bought himself some time, but he knew he couldn't avoid swim practice forever. He needed to figure out a long-term solution and fast. Back in Maisie's room, Andrew paced anxiously, trying to make sense of his situation. He'd pinched himself countless times throughout the day, hoping to wake up from this bizarre dream, but to no avail. This was real. Somehow, impossibly, he was stuck in the body of a stranger. He considered telling someone, Maisie's parents or maybe Zoe, but quickly dismissed the idea. They'd think he was crazy. Hell, he wasn't entirely sure he wasn't crazy. As he flopped onto the bed, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling, a thought struck him. If he was here in Maisie's body, where was she? Was she in his body back in Oregon? Or was she gone? The implications were terrifying. He grabbed Maisie's phone, fingers trembling as he searched for his own name on social media. Nothing. It was as if Andrew Thompson had never existed. A knock at the door startled him out of his spiraling thoughts. Maisie, dinner's ready, sweetie. Coming? He called back, his voice still jarringly feminine to his ears. Dinner was a surreal affair. Maisie's parents chatted about their days, asking questions about classes and swim practice that Andrew fumbled to answer. Her older brother, home from graduate school for a visit, regaled them with stories of his research project. Andrew picked at his food, his appetite diminished by the constant stress of maintaining his charade. He couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment someone would see through his act and realize he wasn't really Maisie. After dinner, he retreated to Maisie's room, ostensibly to study, but really to continue his frantic research. He combed through her emails, text messages, and social media, trying to piece together more details of her life. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to set in. Andrew's head throbbed with the effort of processing everything that had happened. He changed into pajamas, averting his eyes as much as possible, and crawled into bed. Lying there in the dark, in a stranger's body, in a stranger's room, Andrew felt utterly alone. Tears pricked at his eyes, and he let them fall, the stress and confusion of the day finally overwhelming him. As he drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was a desperate wish to wake up back in his own body, in his own life. But deep down, he knew that when morning came, he'd still be Maisie Collins, with no idea how or why this had happened, or how to fix it. The next few days passed in a blur of classes, social obligations, and near-constant anxiety. Andrew did his best to maintain the illusion of being Maisie, but he felt like he was walking a tightrope, always one misstep away from disaster. He managed to avoid swim practice for 2 more days, claiming a persistent headache, but he knew he couldn't keep it up forever. On the 3rd day, Zoe cornered him after class, concern etched on her face. Maisie, what's going on? You've been acting weird all week. Are you sure you're okay? Andrew forced a smile. I'm fine. Really, just adjusting to the new semester, I guess. Zoe didn't look convinced. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? Is this about Ethan? Did something happen between you two? No, nothing happened with Ethan, Andrew said quickly. Everything's fine, I promise. But as the words left his mouth, he realized how hollow they sounded. Nothing was fine. He was trapped in a body and a life that weren't his own, with no idea how to get back to his real self. That night, lying awake in Maisie's bed, Andrew made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this, pretending to be someone he wasn't. He needed to find answers, even if it meant risking everything. The next morning, instead of heading to campus, Andrew took Maisie's car and drove. He had no real destination in mind, just a desperate need to escape the suffocating routine he'd been living. As he drove, he found himself heading towards the coast. The sight of the ocean, vast and unknowable, resonated with the turmoil in his soul. He parked at a deserted stretch of beach and walked along the shore, the warm sand between his toes a stark reminder of how far he was from his familiar Pacific Northwest. Sitting on the sand, waves lapping at his feet, Andrew closed his eyes and tried to make sense of his situation. There had to be a reason this had happened. Some cosmic mix-up, or a glitch in the matrix, or something. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a strange calm settled over him. Whatever had happened, whatever the reason, he was here now, and if he couldn't find a way back to his old life, he'd have to learn to live this new one. With renewed determination, Andrew stood and brushed the sand from his clothes. He had missed all his classes and another swim practice, but for the first time since waking up in Maisie's body, he felt like he had a purpose. He would continue to live as Maisie, to the best of his ability. But he would also search for answers. There had to be an explanation for what had happened to him, and he was going to find it. As he drove back to Maisie's home, Andrew made a mental list of everything he needed to do. First, he'd need to smooth things over with Zoe and the swim team. Then he'd start researching. Near-death experiences, out-of-body phenomena, quantum physics, anything that might offer a clue to his bizarre situation. And most importantly, he'd need to start truly living Maisie's life, not just going through the motions. It was the only way to gather more information and potentially find a way back to his own body. When he arrived home, Maisie's mother was waiting up, worry creasing her brow. "Where have you been? We've been calling and texting all day." "I'm sorry," Andrew said, and he meant it. "I just needed some time to think. Clear my head." Maisie's mother enveloped him in a hug, and Andrew found himself leaning into the embrace, suddenly overwhelmed by emotion. "Oh, sweetheart, whatever it is, you know you can talk to us, right?" Andrew nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As he headed up to Maisie's room, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He might be trapped in this strange situation, but he wasn't going to let it defeat him. Tomorrow, he decided, he would go to swim practice. He would throw himself into Maisie's classes, her friendships, her life, and all the while he would keep searching for answers. As he drifted off to sleep that night, Andrew felt something he hadn't experienced since waking up in Maisie's body. Hope. Whatever had brought him here, he was determined to find his way back. And until then, he would make the most of this extraordinary situation. The alarm blared once again, but this time Andrew was ready for it. He got up, went through Maisie's morning routine, and headed to campus with a newfound sense of purpose. In the locker room before swim practice, he took a deep breath and changed into Maisie's team swimsuit, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible. It was uncomfortable, but he reminded himself that this was necessary. He needed to fully immerse himself in Maisie's life if he had any hope of understanding what had happened to him. As he stepped out onto the pool deck, Zoe rushed over, relief evident on her face. "Maisie, you're back! We were all so worried!" "I'm sorry," Andrew said, trying to channel what he imagined Maisie would say. "I've been dealing with some personal stuff, but I'm here now." Zoe squeezed his arm sympathetically. "Whatever it is, you know I'm here for you, right?" Andrew nodded, a lump forming in his throat at the genuine concern in Zoe's eyes. He was beginning to understand why she and Maisie were such close friends. Practice was grueling.
Andrew was grateful for Maisie's muscle memory as he swam lap after lap. By the end, he was exhausted but exhilarated. There was something freeing about pushing this unfamiliar body to its limits. As he toweled off after practice, Ethan approached, a hesitant smile on his face.
"Hey, Maisie. Glad to see you back. We missed you at practice this week."
Andrew felt a flutter in his stomach. Maisie's stomach, he reminded himself. Was this how she felt around Ethan? "Thanks," he managed. "It's good to be back." Over the next few weeks, Andrew settled into a routine. He threw himself into Maisie's classes, surprised to find that he enjoyed the challenge of learning new material. He went to every swim practice, pushing himself to improve Maisie's times. He spent time with Zoe and the rest of Maisie's friends, slowly becoming more comfortable in social situations. But he didn't forget his mission. Every spare moment was spent researching, looking for any clue that might explain his situation. He pored over books on consciousness, quantum entanglement, and parallel universes. He scoured online forums for stories of body swapping or personality changes. One evening, as he was deep in a Reddit thread about out-of-body experiences, a knock at the door startled him. Maisie's mother poked her head in. "Honey, there's someone here to see you." Puzzled, Andrew headed downstairs. In the living room, looking nervous and out of place, was Ethan. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably.
I was worried about you. You've seemed different lately. I wanted to make sure you were okay."
Andrew felt a surge of guilt. In his focus on solving the mystery of his situation, he'd neglected the relationships in Maisie's life. "I'm fine," he said softly.
"Just going through some stuff."
Ethan nodded, then seemed to gather his courage.
"Listen, Maisie, I know we've always just been friends, but I was wondering if maybe you'd like to go out sometime? Like on a real date?"
Andrew froze. This was exactly the kind of situation he'd been dreading. How could he navigate Maisie's romantic life when he wasn't even sure who he was anymore? "Ethan, he began, then paused. What would Maisie want? From everything he'd learned about her, she seemed to care for Ethan, and if he was stuck in this life indefinitely, didn't he owe it to her to live it fully? "I'd like that," he found himself saying. Ethan's face lit up with a grin. "Great. How about Friday night? We could grab dinner and see a movie?"
"Sounds perfect,"
Andrew said, returning the smile. As Ethan left, waving goodbye with a spring in his step, Andrew leaned against the closed door, his mind whirling. What had he just gotten himself into? The date with Ethan was nice. They had dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant, then saw an action movie that Andrew actually enjoyed. Ethan was funny and sweet, and Andrew could see why Maisie had been drawn to him. But as Ethan walked him to Maisie's front door at the end of the night, Andrew felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't his life, his relationship. He was an imposter playing a role in someone else's story. "I had a great time tonight," Ethan said softly, leaning in. Andrew's heart raced. Was Ethan going to kiss him? What should he do? At the last moment, he turned his head, and Ethan's lips landed on his cheek instead. "Me too," Andrew said quickly. "Good night, Ethan." He rushed inside, his cheeks burning. This was getting too complicated. He needed answers, and he needed them soon. The next day, frustrated with his lack of progress in his research, Andrew decided to take a different approach. He began meditating, hoping to tap into some deeper level of consciousness that might provide answers. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. Andrew continued to live Maisie's life as best he could, all while searching for a way back to his own. He went on more dates with Ethan, each one a confusing mix of enjoyment and guilt. He excelled in Maisie's classes, set new personal records in swimming, and deepened her friendships. But always, in the back of his mind, was the question, who was he really? Andrew or Maisie? As the semester neared its end, Andrew found himself at a crossroads. He had lived as Maisie for months now, and in many ways it felt more real than his old life. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was living a lie. One night, unable to sleep, he slipped out of the house and drove to the beach where he'd had his epiphany months ago. Sitting on the sand, watching the moonlight dance on the waves, he made a decision. He couldn't keep living this double life. It wasn't fair to Maisie, to her friends and family, or to himself. Tomorrow he would tell the truth. To Zoe first, then to Maisie's parents, and finally to Ethan. They might think he was crazy, but he couldn't bear the weight of this secret any longer. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, Andrew felt a strange sensation wash over him. A tingling that started in his fingertips and spread throughout his body. The world around him began to blur and shift. For a moment, he thought he glimpsed another figure on the beach, a young woman with honey blonde hair and green eyes. She smiled at him, and he understood. Somehow, impossibly, it was Maisie, the real Maisie. And then everything went dark. When Andrew opened his eyes, he was back in his own room, in his own body in Oregon. For a moment, he lay there, disoriented and confused. Had it all been a dream? But as he sat up, he noticed something on his nightstand that hadn't been there before. A small seashell, still damp with salt water. And he knew. It had been real. All of it. As he picked up the shell, marveling at its delicate whorls, Andrew felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the experience, for the lessons learned, for the life he'd lived as Maisie. He didn't know why it had happened or how. Perhaps he never would. But he knew that he had been changed by the experience in ways he was only beginning to understand. With a smile, he placed the shell back on his nightstand and got up to face the day. His day in his life. But he would always carry a part of Maisie with him, a reminder of the extraordinary journey he'd taken. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.